Hey everyone, welcome to Curveball. I am so excited to be here with my guest today, Rachel Collins. She has an amazing story of life, like just pushing her to the brink and stretching her so thin that she actually started to disappear under the weight of responsibility. She knows that feeling so well. Rachel was already balancing a super demanding career, raising a child, and supporting her aging parents when life threw her a completely unexpected curveball. Someone else, like a really person in your family, became seriously ill, and then you became a full time caregiver on top of being a full time caregiver, on top of being a full time caregiver, right? And the overwhelm was real. There's fear, exhaustion, the fear of slipping away from yourself. It could have all buried her, but instead, Rachel found a way to take control. She developed a mindful productivity system that I cannot wait to tell you about, a way to focus on what truly mattered instead of getting lost in the chaos. What started as a survival strategy became a transformational approach to life, one that she now shares with others, helping them navigate overwhelm, reclaim their time, and align their energy with what truly matters. And it's sort of a joke because she thinks like she's here for a podcast interview, but I'm really getting some coaching, I feel like today, So Rachel is living proof that even in the most difficult moments, there's an opportunity to reset, realign, and reclaim what's important. Oh, and here's a fun fact. She's been creating mandalas before mandalas were even cool, like 30 years, using art as a way to center herself, even in life's messiest moments. Rachel, welcome to Curveball.
Thank you. It is so great to be here. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Oh my gosh, me too. You look absolutely radiant today. So when you suddenly had to take on the role of caregiver, did that come completely out of the blue? Did you have any warning that it was going to happen?
No, none at all. So it was just one of these shocking situations. I won't, go into the details for the sake of somebody's privacy, but
of course, know all the details though.
Yeah, it was just, we went from having a family picnic in late August to near the end of August. All of a sudden it was like, oh, can't bend over to lift something up. And honestly, I gave this person in my life a really hard time. I'm like, oh, you're being a wimp, right? And a day later, we hear appendicitis, hernia, and tumor.
Oh, no.
So stage 3 cancer.
Oh, goodness.
And thank goodness for the appendicitis, because otherwise that cancer might not have been seen.
Amazing.
And so we went from family picnic, wonderful day, to surgery, not coming out of hospital, and life is upside down. And your head just reels, right? Like it's really hard to kind of keep up and figure out, okay, how am I going to be there just kind of to see through everything that we need to see through? So really, dark times there just for a little bit, just to figure it out.
Well, how did you become the designated see it througher? Like, how were you on point? Is that sort of your role in the family that they're like, Rachel will take care of everything?
Yeah, I'm an oldest daughter. I'm one of these responsible people that just kind of, is less likely to fall to pieces and can kind of be there and make things happen.
There are people like in a time of, crisis, and I sort of see, my observation is that there are people who figure it out and people who freak out. Mm-hmm. And you're one of those figure it out people. Like I had a boss who said, I've never seen anyone like, I just never knew that chaos could actually calm somebody down. But when things are chaotic, you love it. You get really dialed in. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I do. I think that's interesting. So what were those first few weeks like for you? Were you like trying to navigate all of this suddenly? And then you still have other responsibilities like your parents and your own child.
Yeah.
And yourself. Isn't that?
Yeah.
And yourself. Like, isn't that so crazy? I'm thinking about you as an afterthought when you should be coming first.
And working full time in a professional job as well, right?
So what was your career back then?
Still is. I'm in human resources. So I'm a senior manager in recruitment. So it's like, all of that and then working full time.
And then you have to be there and like interview people and be like, hey, join our company. And you're just like,
dying on the inside.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I would say that honestly, like work was like so good about it. They were so flexible. I have a really great boss who's just take a moment. Don't try to be a superhero here.
Right.
Do what you need to do. So I think getting that type of support is really helpful. And honestly, I feel like it took me like just to catch up and kind of figure out a strategy and how am I going to get through this? It took a little bit of time, right? And the thing that I really, you talk about being there for yourself. like that was the hardest piece, right? To kind of get to a place where I'm like, okay, I can keep all of this stuff going, but I have no time for myself. And I have some really great girlfriends where, I just broke down, I was sobbing and they're like, what are you doing for you? Right? If this is going to be for the long haul, where are you showing up? What are you doing for you? How can you make sure there's still time for yourself?
Right.
What are those things that still bring you joy? Right.
Mm.
And that really kind of was like a little bit of a wake up to go, oh yeah, to do this long term, I
Right.
have to be able to put myself first. And that's really tough to do, but it made all the difference. And everybody stepped in to like then help, right? If you're open to
Right.
asking for help.
Yes, that's something that I've learned too, is that because last year my brain broke, and during that time, like I have a really good friend who's a Buddhist. And so Buddhists are good because they have like they have really good like compassion, but they have a lot of boundaries in order to be compassionate towards people. And one of the things that she said, you have to come first, and it is not your job to support anyone on your support
Mhm.
team is there for you. And yes, like, of course, like your kids can have a cry in front of you, but then they have to have their shit together in order to help you. And I remember sort of trying that on initially and just being like, ooh, that feels so weird, especially as a mom too,
Mhm.
because I think we're used to helping to get people through things. And so I really had to surrender into that. And I'm so grateful that I did. My kids got closer with each other. They got closer with like my husband and some of my family members too, because they were all there supporting each other too. By supporting yourself and having other people support themselves, like it's like a rising tides lifts all ships, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So during this time, though, you developed a practice. So I also developed a practice when my brain broke, but I love that you said it wasn't immediate because sometimes when we're in that situation, we might literally be like down on our knees, like praying to God, just being like, please give me the answer. And it does not come immediately, but when it comes, I feel like it sort of comes completely.
Mhm.
All of a sudden you're just like, oh, boom, I have the answer. So tell me about that moment for you. What was that like?
Yeah. So that moment for me, it's around mindful productivity. And
Mm,
so what happened was I realized I'm not going to get the luxury of a lot of time, but I need to have a way of carving out for myself something every day that's going to bring me joy, that's going to feed my soul, that's just going to,
right.
help me still feel like myself, right? Still
Yes.
show up as the same person. And what I developed was basically mindful time blocks. And people work in time blocks, but what I would do is basically start with a meditation
Hmm.
beforehand. So really kind of grounding my energy in, that place of gratitude and meditation.
Were you a meditator before this?
Yes. So
Okay.
not as a really solid regular practice. That was one of the gifts that came out of this situation
Yeah.
was I got much better at doing those things that I knew I enjoyed and I knew were really good for self-care, but I wouldn't always make the time for, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so this became something where it's every single day, it didn't have to be long, but 5 minutes of meditation and then 20 minutes of working on something that I loved. And so be
Mm,
it writing, be it art, something for myself where I could express my creativity, express my identity, just feel wholly myself in
right.
that moment and not be thinking about other people, right?
So
And what other people needed. Yeah.
I love that you did this because I actually have a set of watercolors and a watercolor pad downstairs because I also want to do something like just set a timer and paint. But then I sit down to do it and I'm like, I'm not a painter.
Mm,
And
yeah.
it's enough to knock me out that like I had this little thing that had the brushes in and all the water evaporated. That's how long it was. You
Oh,
know?
wow.
Yeah. So like so tell me more about like how do you I mean, I know that's a silly reason to not paint. You would probably say just who cares?
So I would say I think it depends on why you're doing things, right? And
Okay.
so because I was
Oh,
entering from like a place of wanting to express creativity, wanting to do something that relaxed me, wanting to do something that I enjoyed,
right.
and because I'd had a very long practice of having done mandalas for years,
Yes.
I was able to kind of approach it with a mindset that wasn't around like trying to create, perfection or this wonderful thing, but it was really about enjoying that process, right? And so I
Right.
think that piece of, if the intent and the mindset you're bringing is I'm here for the enjoyment of it, it doesn't really matter the outcome as much, right?
Right.
So that's a piece of it for sure. It's just like the mindset that I would approach it with.
You asked such a simple but really big question. You're like, why were you doing it? Like, why were you
Hmm.
doing it in the first place? And I'm like, I don't know. I saw a TikTok video and I'm like, that seems like that would be an amazing practice. And of course, they were
Yeah.
like a watercolor artist. So I'm like, I can do that, like, but I like asking that question. So you help people move to survival mode to intentional living. So I just know from a marketing perspective, you got to be intentional, right? Like marketing is, but one of the things that with all the people I've interviewed on Curveball is that there's a time where they're hit with this curveball and there's this point where they make an intentional step forward into a place of the unknown and they don't know what's going to be on the other side, but they're like, I just need to take action. So, how does somebody move out of survival mode into that place where you feel like, because I think intention implies, at least for a tiny bit of, even for a split
Mhm.
second, you might have 2 feet in the ground and I'm looking forward and I'm able to like make a clear choice to step forward. Because I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way. But
Yeah.
how do you move from survival to intentionality?
Yeah. So I think the process that I teach and then what worked for me was really around creating a long term vision. And so I
Mm,
think when you're in this place of survival and you're kind of like day to day, like just kind of keeping the wheels going on the bus, but you
right,
can have this larger vision of what do you want your life to be like? What matters to you? How does that align with your values? Then what it does is like for myself, it was like being able to then say, okay, even though I'm in this state, I can see and hold like this future that I want
right.
and I can start aligning my choices with that future. And so if there's all
I
these
love this.
demands and things coming
Right,
at me, then I can ask myself, okay, does that feed into the life I want to create? Right? Does
right,
that feed into where I want to go? And it became much easier to say no to things that were, not aligned with that.
right,
I think in a moment of crisis as well, it was also easier to say no. Like people understood I can't
right,
do everything I've always done. Right. And so in a lot of ways, it was really freeing because I had this vision of where I wanted to go. And I basically empowered myself to say, okay, I'm going to, just do the bare minimum I need to in these areas because these are the areas where I want to put my attention and focus.
right. Oh
And
gosh,
that
right,
visioning and then kind of like planning around that is really, I'd say, what got me unstuck and able to, hold that thought that there can be something more to come.
right. Again, that makes so much sense. Like I interviewed somebody at again for Curveball, and she was like, people literally like sleepwalk through life. We could get into these routines and we just think, and then when you wake up and you just set this, but then okay, so you have this intention and you have this future life, and that's all really great. But then you also have the reality of caretaking parents. I don't know how old your child was at this point, if they were like, you could leave them alone if you needed to run
Yeah,
to
I
the
was lucky
store
that
or
way. So my son was 11. So,
okay.
that perfect age where you can start leaving them at home a little bit and they can start helping out a little bit more. Yeah.
Right. So tell me, like, when you were trying on and saying no, like, what was a time when you said no that you're like, I cannot believe I said no. And I don't, and I feel really good about it. Were there moments like that you really could witness your own growth?
Yeah, and it is not that I wouldn't have said no before. I think what changed for me was the fact that I got okay inside with saying it. And so the
Mm,
behavior might have looked the same way, right? I might have still have said no to something, but I would have been like ruminating a little bit, going, "Oh, I should do that, and why aren't I doing that?" And versus being absolutely okay to go, "Nope, not doing that. It's not my focus right now.
right,
Thanks for the invitation," right? And so it really was less a change in behavior and more of a change of mindset for me around how I, made decisions and was
right.
okay with those decisions once I made them.
Well, that's so interesting because I could appreciate that at a time when people like really like legit need you and are relying on you. And you might have to say, no, like I don't know if guilt is the right word or like
Mhm.
you might, I don't know. I just know in situations like and tell me if this rings true to you that I remember when I was like, I knew I was going to have brain surgery, but I didn't know when. And I'm sort of like this free agent between like neurologist and neurosurgeon. And so I just was at this mastermind meeting and all these people are like, oh my God, what are you going to do? Like before your surgery. And I'm like, I also made this radical decision to do nothing and to only do things that I loved. And what's so interesting is my most successful friends, like seriously, like the ones who like are like those manifestors, they're like, oh my God, that's all we do. We only do the things that we love. And I'm just
Mhm.
like, oh my God, this is so cool. But I know that there was this feeling like I needed to be, I felt like there was a societal narrative that was like I had to be heroic. Did you ever feel that way too in that situation? To the
Yeah,
point of self neglect.
yeah, that was absolutely a risk for me, right? That's why I think that intervention from my friends to go, wait a minute, right? This is not sustainable. You're going to start impacting your own health and well-being,
Wow,
right?
amazing.
Like that was really important. And I was really lucky that I had
Right.
that outside perspective to kind of, help me recognize that, right? Help me call that.
So I'm already feeling a theme in this conversation because you're taught like the first thing you said is like, why were you doing that creative practice? And I literally was like, I don't know, it looks cool. I thought I could. And so I really didn't have a why. So like everyone always
Mhm.
talks about, oh, define your why. I love Simon Sinek, but what's so interesting is there are three other parts to like the why. Like that's just the first question. I think there are like there are three parts to it. It's like, why am I doing this? Who needs this? And like, how am I going to, I forget like the other part. So like why, I feel like the why concept and knowing your why
Mhm.
has been sufficiently like just exploited to the point that I feel like it might, people think it means something, but my hunch is it means something a lot different to you. So what does your why mean to you? And then how do people like legitimately, no fluff, step forward and start to find it?
Yeah. So this for me is where meditation and journaling come in as practices.
Mm,
So I hadn't mentioned this, but one of the things that I would do like in that, 20 minutes is I would write, right? And I would, really take the time to kind of think about what was working well, what I wanted to change, why that mattered to me. And stuff just, when I'm lucky, I think when I write, stuff just flows, right? These
yes.
things come out of me, truths surface, right? If I'm willing to kind of be open to hearing that wisdom of my inner voice, that
Yes.
stuff we all kind of know, but we don't want to acknowledge, right? All of that comes out for me in writing. And so I think
Yes.
that's journaling is like a really great practice for kind of getting to that why and really being able to kind of have that more examined life of, you know, how does this align with what I care
Right.
about? How is this important to me? How does this reflect my identity? Really being able to start making choices around
Right.
kind of where we're putting our time and energy. But you have to have that self-awareness first. You have to be willing to listen to that inner wisdom to kind of get to that place.
Yes, it is true. Because sometimes when I journal, it's like I'm having a conversation. I know I'm having a conversation with myself, but it's literally because I like to, I have a hard time writing with a pen. So I type it. And sometimes I'm literally like, who, who is this? Is this me? Or is this my guide? Like, I don't know who it is. Sometimes I feel like I get channeled. Like sometimes I feel like someone else is talking to me. Sometimes I feel like my brother who passed away
Mhm.
sometimes comes through like in my journaling too. So I can really appreciate God. I have not journaled in ages either. Full
Yeah.
disclosure. So I'm going to start. Like you're making me want to. First of all, I want to meditate right after this meeting. I literally, when someone's talking about getting a massage, and
Yeah.
you're like, I want a massage. Like your whole body's. Let me have that. That's how I feel about meditating right now.
Nice.
So how does this intentional thinking like, how does it help you just cope, survive, make decisions, move forward in these high stress situations?
Yeah. So I think that it's hard to describe, but it's like being able to have kind of a present moment awareness. So kind of that it's almost like an ability to observe yourself, right? If you were
Mm-hmm.
like a loving friend observing yourself from the outside, right? Being able to kind of hold that space and, that helps alleviate like that kind of sense of like the judgment or the guilt, those things that, we've been talking about, right? And, being able to hold that present moment awareness while
Mm-hmm.
at the same time being able to you're not fighting like the place that you're in, right? There's a level of acceptance, right? For this
Right.
is the
Yep.
reality that I'm working with. But at the same time, being able to kind of hold open possibility that
Mm.
things can get better or that there can be more, right?
Right.
And so it's a really interesting kind of state of mind if you can get into it, where
Yeah.
it's, I know and acknowledge and see my present reality, but I'm not going to let that define me. right? I'm going to be open to
Right.
it being something more. Yeah.
I love that. Well, because sometimes I'm a words person too, because I know you're a writer and I am too. And I really pay attention to the words that people use. And like when people are in my programs or my clients, I'll be like, I'm really struggling with my biggest struggle is this, or my biggest challenge is this. And I'm like, let's, so there, you're not allowed to say that because you have to
Mhm.
reframe it. And you can say, oh my gosh, I am so curious. How is this going to work out?
Mhm.
Because when you trip the word curious, you trigger something in your brain. You open yourself up to possibility, but your brain is then going to start thinking about, well, how could we do that? And so where if you're like, I'm in a struggle, I'm in a challenge, that's a very like downward, like sort of, and your brain prepares yourself like in a different way too. So does it
Yeah.
sort of work like that, that you're open? Because I always wonder, like, how do you get open? Like, what's the secret, to really getting that? Because I feel like you're getting these divine downloads, but you're like, no, it truly is just meditation and journaling. It's simple.
Yeah, it's simple, but it's also, I think it's the practice, right? And so I had talked about, sometimes I've been, dabbling it versus doing it regularly, right? And
Hmm.
I think that, when we kind of do things kind of with some consistency and it just starts creating more space,
Right.
and more openness, right? For those kind of messages to come.
Yes.
So I do really believe in, that's why I've kind of described it as like a mindful focus block, right? Where it's like, time that I've carved out that's for me, for something I
Right.
care about, that's really intentional time that I know won't be interrupted. It's just it creates that space then to kind of use that in other ways. And I loved what you said about, like how you frame things up, right? Where it's not a challenge. It's, I'm curious about this, right? Because I
Yes.
think that that framing is so critically important. And so when I'm, if I'm using that time for something that, aligns to my long-term vision,
Hmm.
maybe it feels like an impossibility. If I frame it up that way, it's going to stay impossible, right?
Right. Right.
But if
Yes,
I
exactly.
yeah, but if I frame it up to say, this is what I want to work towards, how can I make that happen, right? How can I do that in small steps? Because I only have this tiny little bit of time and these
Right.
circumstances I'm in. Then the brain, it's like an open loop, right? It kind of keeps like giving you messages or opportunities.
Yep.
Things pop up because you framed it up in such a way of this is what I want to get. And like, how do I do that? Right. Or what
Right.
are those ways I can do it versus I can't do it all right now, but just being able to break things down into little steps and
Yes.
then kind of keeping that open loop so that when opportunity shows up, you go, oh, I'll do that. Right. This may seem a little bit silly. That's what I did when I wrote a book, right? I didn't set out to write a book on journal prompts, but I was doing it. I was using it. And then I was like, oh, why don't I publish this? Right. And,
Amazing. Yeah.
things I was doing in tiny bits became something that actually, somebody else might sit down to like
Right.
just do. Right.
Yes. Well, it reminds me, I practice a kind of yoga called hot yoga where you do the same 26 postures. And there's this one where you put your knee up and then you end up like standing like on one leg with your leg out in front of you. And
Yeah.
I was like, I'll never be able to do that. Therefore, I will never. And I just remembered having this like moment in a class just saying, well, you're absolutely never going to be able to do it if you never even try.
Yeah.
Try. And so it's just, and then one of my teachers, you see your teachers, and she was like, it took me like 7 years to learn how to do this. So just give
Wow.
yourself time. And I'm just like, it is so true because I wasn't even trying. So sometimes I think we quit before we start because we're just
Mhm.
like, we don't even give ourselves a chance. So I know that you have courses and programs. So tell me about a story about somebody like that you've worked with who had an amazing, sort of an amazing before and after story when they embraced your methodology. Because what do you call it? Mindfulness momentum.
Yeah, I'm a program Mindful Momentum, and it's
Mindful moment.
really around using mindfulness to overcome
Mm,
procrastination. And what I would say is, the real mindset shift is kind of recognizing that this procrastination is sometimes a survival mechanism, right?
right.
And
Well, no,
so I
tell me
had
more.
one
I
person
said
who,
right, but
yeah,
why is procrastination a survival mechanism?
well, because what happens
Uh-oh.
is,
Now I don't now I have a
oh.
good reason to procrastinate. Yeah, thanks. Okay.
Exactly. No, what I'd say is it's that acceptance piece, right? It's like I had one person who was like so busy beating themselves up because they procrastinate, right? And they made that part of their identity
Oh,
because
right.
it was like, this is what I always do, right? And so if survival mechanism, I would say in the sense of it, like was reinforcing their
Mm-hmm.
identity of how they thought about themselves and keeping them in a place that was really stuck, right? And
Right.
so it wasn't necessarily a survival mechanism that was helping them, but it was kind of reinforcing like a worldview of this is who I am, this is how I
Right.
operate,
Sure.
and I'm doing it all wrong, right? Where in being able to kind of have a little bit more of a mindful, compassionate kind of
Mm.
approach to it, they were able to kind of recognize that, okay, here's maybe some of those reasons why I'm doing it, right?
Oh,
Here's
right.
some of those things that might trigger me to do it. Here's how in some ways it may be serving me, right? These are the things
Right.
that allow me to, get out of or not deal with. And so kind of having that mindset of, non-judgmental awareness to be able to kind of observe themselves and then
Mm-hmm.
make decisions coming out of that, right? Versus
Right.
going, this is who I am and it's the only way to be. And,
Well, yeah,
very subtle shifts, but I think
yes.
really important ones, right?
I just read something about because my kids have anxiety. And so they'll talk about like my anxiety. And then I heard this very interesting to say, instead of saying I'm anxious or I have my anxiety, it's like you say, I'm feeling anxious about this right now,
Mm-hmm.
like this. So then you name it. And then I bet you can start to identify patterns, like if things like are higher or lower triggers for you. But I thought that was a really interesting way to look at anxiety too. And you're saying it like,
Yeah.
instead of saying I'm a procrastinator, just saying, why do I procrastinate? Like, why are some reasons? There's that little big question again. Why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
for
know that
sure.
there is a technique, it's called like the why method. And you're supposed to answer the question why at least 6 times. And I love that. Like I never do not learn something about myself during that time
Yeah,
too. That's very cool.
that's a
So
great one.
then your mandala and your artwork is a personal mindfulness tool for you. So how how does creativity, like how does that work that it translates into something that gives you that calmness and clarity? Because people might say, "Oh, mandalas, but I'm running a company and I got stuff I got to deal." Like, okay, you know what I mean? Someone might be like, "I don't see the connection." So, what is
Yeah.
that connection between creativity and art and calm clarity?
Yeah. So for me, it's a very personal connection. I think for other people, they might feel that when they're jogging or, maybe mountain climbing, right? But, for me, it really is a way of it kind of does two things. And so one thing is like when you're sitting there and you're drawing or you're painting, you're very focused in on kind of a
Mm-hmm.
smaller area, right?
Yeah.
And so you're not, sitting there hopefully thinking about all these other things, like you're really focused on what you're doing, right? So
Yes.
that's creating in and of itself, I think, a mindful awareness of that space, that moment, what you're doing. The other piece I would layer onto it is, and once again, like I've used the word mindset quite a few times, but it's really the attitude with which you do it that matters as well. And so if you are creating and you're flowing and you're allowing yourself to kind of, be free in it, to express yourself, sometimes I'll do a line and, my first thought is, oh, that was a mistake. And it's, oh no, like those little mistakes are actually the things that then, how can I transform that? Keep going. Like I
Right.
never sit there and go, okay, I didn't like that one. I didn't like that line. I'm throwing that out. Instead, it's kind of like this spark to go, okay, how can that evolve, right? How can that change? How can that
Yes.
surprise me? And, this way that of, I think it kind of translates into life as well. I take kind
Right.
of lessons from the mandala where I'll be like, okay, how can I then apply that, right? To allow those types of surprises, to allow things
Right.
to kind of shift and flow and not, say, oh, I made a mistake. I'm done. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So
Well, my
it's,
grandma was an artist
yeah.
and yeah, like I think this is super cool. My great grandparents emigrated from Austria and had a dairy farm in northern Wisconsin. And she she was like one of those, like she could not help but create, like always. And so she would draw in the steam in the barn windows. And they're like, oh my gosh. And so
Wow.
they sent her to the Art Institute in Chicago in the
Nice.
30s, like 19. I
Wow.
know, it's super cool. But she would tell me, I remember she's like, when you have a mistake like that, she's that literally becomes the soul of the whole piece.
Yeah.
And so she can look at something. So she was like a fashion illustrator for Marshall Fit, like a commercial artist. It's very different from today's artist because it's like you had to draw with pen and ink. And so she could look at her old portfolio and she would say, this happened here. So then I did this. And I used to love, and she said, that's the soul of the piece.
Yeah.
That like it's meant to be
Yes.
that too. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So what are some ways, like if you're just like I'm not a creative person, like I don't feel like I could do, like what's another way that someone could do something mindfulness that maybe if they're just like feeling a little nervous about maybe trying art?
Yeah. I mean, there's tons of mindfulness practices that you can do. So certainly meditation is one of them. Anything that will kind of bring you to this moment of awareness, this moment of non-judgmental
Right.
acceptance and observation, I think is really good, right? So it doesn't have to be art. There is a mindfulness practice, which is called the five senses. And so it's, just taking, it looks like you know that one, right? So you just take a moment to notice five things you can observe or see, right? Four things that I think it's can hear, three things that you could taste, right? One thing you can feel. And so it's just being able to kind of like ground yourself in that moment and in your senses.
Yes.
Anything that will take you out of, feeling, just kind of that day-to-day stress, right? And so that's where meditation really
There's
comes
a
in.
quote by James Clear, who wrote that book, Atomic Habits, and it says, anxiety is thought without control, and flow is control without thought.
Oh, beautiful.
Oh, I know. Isn't that good? Because I think about those times when I'm in flow, right? Like I love to garden, and that would be like, that is my meditation in the summer. Like I am in the moment. You're just in the moment.
Yeah.
Right there, just with the flowers and just with the bees and the bugs and the worms. And that's so wonderful. Okay. So Rachel Collins, if people are like, I like Rachel Collins' vibe, I would love to work with her. I know you have a free option where people can get to know you. And then you also have a paid program. So tell me about both of those.
Yeah, the free option is Mindful Momentum. So you can access that from my website. My website is passionpurpose.today. And yeah,
good.
Like that title?
Web address. Oh, I have web address envy. That's really good.
Fun. And the paid one, basically, it's done in cohorts. And the idea behind it is called the Focus Flow Success Circle.
Ooh.
And so there's a lot of us that, really want to kind of work with other people. So if you think about creative people, maybe working in isolation, they would love feedback from others, encouragement, peer reviews, would, love just to, kind of have more of that accountability.
Yes.
All of that.
Success is way more fun with friends.
It is, right? Like why work in complete isolation if, you can get feedback, right, from other people
right, yes.
and know earlier that you're on track or off track or, what do you want to do to pivot? And so that is really, it's kind of started up in cohorts because that community aspect of it is really critical, right?
Yes.
It's being able to kind of build, a sense of community while you're doing that versus working in isolation.
That is where I have met some of my best friends in online communities, like seriously. And then you get to see each other in person and you're just like, oh my gosh. And I just think that's one of the best parts about being in the biz. And so I just want to thank you so much for joining me on Curveball. You are just a radiant being in this world. And I am so grateful that I know you and this work. I just know that I can just feel when people work with you, they're in good hands.
Oh, thank you. This has been such a joy. It's been so nice meeting you. And I really appreciate the time together.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure.